Carmen Rita Wong is a writer and nonprofit board leader whose board positions include the Moth and the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She was the co-creator and television host of On the Money on CNBC and was a national advice columnist for Glamour, Latina, Men's Health, and Good Housekeeping. She is the author of a series of novels and 2 best-selling advice books. She is the founder and CEO of Malecon Productions, LLC, where she develops female-focused media and entertainment. She lives in Manhattan with her daughter. We are thrilled to have you here with us today, Carmen.
Thank you all so much for having me. So I'm Carmen Rita Wong, and people ask me right away, why would you write a memoir? Look, it's my 5th book, actually, my first hardcover, but I became resolved to writing stories, even though I did it in a roundabout way, and to write my memoir when I was a young student, sitting in the stacks back in the 80s, because I would sit and look around and read the spines, and I wouldn't see anyone who came close to who I was in reams and reams of books, brown, Black, Asian, Indigenous, or women. And I said, where were our stories? So I wanted to tell my story in particular because it's a very American story. It's not told enough, not elevated enough, and it's not known as an American story, even though there are millions more like me. So I wrote it purposefully as a page-turning narrative, like a mystery, to pull you in and engage every reader, no matter what background, tightly. And though it's a very specific story about identity and family, it's also a universal story because it works to answer a question we all ask ourselves: who am I and why? Now, in the identity, I have to have you play this little game, which people have been doing to me all my life. Take a quick second to guess my background. Just a second. All right, let's see how you did. I was born to a Dominican mother, Afro-Dominican mother, and a Chinese father in uptown Manhattan in Harlem, and spent my early years between a big, broad Dominican family and community who all lived within several blocks of each other and in Chinatown, downtown, along with my big brother who was 6 years older. He's the other Wong. Now, how did this Dominican-Chinese combo happen? My grandfather paid 2 Chinese gangsters, no air quotes, to marry his 2 teenage daughters and get the family's immigration documents in motion. And this arranged marriage ended 7 years later, by the time I was a toddler. My mother remarried. Now, her second marriage would take my brother and I away from everything and everyone we knew and loved, because she married the opposite of our Papi Wong, an Anglo-American graduate student of economics at Columbia University. Now, he moved us to New Hampshire in the late 1970s. You can imagine. Our welcome mat was being pulled over by the police. Right soon after we moved, a few doors down from our own home, because our new neighbors had reported that there were Puerto Ricans casing the neighborhood. It was a stark welcome to white America for my brother and me. And in this new place, we learned that our identities meant to these people that we were less than, and we would be treated as such. So our identity went from being a point of pride and richness and excitement and community to pain. Assimilation. It started on day 1. Our new father didn't allow Spanish in the house, the language, the food, or Chinese, anything Chinese, the music, even how my mother dressed and how she dressed us changed. We went from very dapper and very coiffed city folks to conservatively dressed mimics of who was now around us. And my mother and my stepfather had my 4 younger sisters in quick succession. Now, we drove back to the city often, at least once a quarter, to see our original family, both Dominican and Chinese. But New Hampshire over the years became a big eraser, rubbing our brownness off and blowing it off the page. One summer when I was 16 years old, my grandmother, Abuela, she stayed with us so my mother could help her with her chemotherapy. And the morning after she arrived, I walked down the stairs to greet her in her makeshift room, and my face was burning with shame. and my throat was tight with pain. My Spanish was gone. I couldn't talk to one of the most important people in my life, the first and only person to love me without condition. She was my rock, my abuela. Assimilation had robbed me of my culture and language, and as a result, my family and community. And as time went by, my mother, she completely had to suppress and deny who she was, an Afro-Dominican woman, to live as someone else or like someone else, a white American woman. She became, I write, like a bug in a jar, suffocating, but fighting to poke holes in the lid so she could breathe. And she took her frustrations out on us kids with abuse and control because she was filled with resentment, and the pain of her loneliness had to escape somehow. Now, my teens and 20s brought more challenges of identity. I learned in college, then in the fine art business, later in magazines, hosting a national TV show, radio show, all in the topic, by the way, my stepfather's topic of finance, and then becoming a faculty professor myself, that I would always be the recipient of the limitations of bias and all the things that come with being a brown woman in this country. I could not achieve my way out of my skin or gender. But somehow I always kept going because my mother did a very good thing. She raised me like and this is a joke and not a joke, an entitled white man. Now, what I mean is she believed to her core that this country would allow me to do and have anything I wanted if I just worked hard enough and performed well enough, Now, we know meritocracy is not the way things are, but she made very clear to me that success was not only for white people. And she took this country's expectations of our non-white identity and she said, no. That was very helpful in life. But she did not, however, tell me the truth of who I actually was. When I was 31 years old, she was dying of colon cancer, and my stepfather chose to tell me that Papi Wong was not my father. He was. The whole time I lived under his roof with his children, they were keeping this secret, and from Papi too. Needless to say, I was devastated, and I held tight to my brother, refusing to see him as anything less than my big, full brother. But I was full of tremendous turmoil because I was wondering now, am I now not Chinese? It felt like I had lost limbs. It took years before I landed on, look, though I was not biologically Chinese, I knew and I know that I was and will always be a Wong, and everything that comes with that. But interestingly, our guts are very smart. This new paternity still didn't feel right. It was like a jacket that didn't fit. And I was right. 15 years after my mother passed, science nerds that we were, my brother, my older brother, the Wong, my sister from the next marriage, and we thought it would be fun to take DNA tests. And we got quite the surprise. I did not share a father with anyone. My mother had lied not only to me, but to Papi and my stepfather, both men thinking I was their child. And so my search began. After years, countless hours of research, paid genealogists, all I had still was this ghost father, not one true lead. But I still wrote this story, my mother's story, sold this book, and I did write it as this mystery, and not really of who he is, who my father is, but who my mother was and who I am because of it. By asking her, why didn't you tell me? I could act as an observer of sorts with my journalism and psychology background, training and education, see my mother as a person, an individual, rather than as my mother, an immigrant woman forced to leave her country, flee from a dictatorship, the daughter of a revolutionary who fought for his country, but who also brought the violence home to all his children and the women in his life. My mother was a woman taken again from her people in New York City to another foreign land, New England. This time, though, she was alone. That woman did what she did to survive and protect an image that was its own form of psychological protection. So I had handed in the first draft of this book. I sat back for a few days, tried to take a breather, and then I refreshed a web page I hadn't touched in months, Ancestry. And boop, there it was. There was my paternal niece. Within 48 hours, I had a new half-sister, a big sister, and a new cultural heritage to add to being China Latina. So, of course, I had to call my editor and say, so we're going to need to write an epilogue. I'm still in it, so to speak, since this was fairly recently, but what writing this book did is bring me peace with why my mother did what she did, how she was to me, and put it into real perspective as to who she was as an immigrant in this country, and the stories that she told herself and everyone else in order to survive that helped define me. I write in the book this line, my mother may have mixed the concrete, but I am the architect. And as for this country and its ideas of identity, millions of kids and young adults face the racism and bias I did and do every day in education and in their careers. And it doesn't have to be this way, especially and particularly once we elevate and learn their stories. But I'll tell you a really great thing about this young generation. I love that it so proudly defines itself. It says, these are my pronouns, these are who I am. And it may have taken me almost 50 years, but I caught up with that moving target. And I think my story explains a lot, particularly to young people, about how and why we are where we are at this point in time in this country because of the generations that came before it. Thank you so much.